And I'd like to start by introducing Dan McEwen. He's the wonderful gentleman, one of the many wonderful gentlemen that help out with the watering at the Payson Community Garden. You've probably seen him out there fixing broken water pipes and different things. And Dan, you're unmuted. You can go ahead and begin.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'll spend about the next 20 minutes talking about the basics of watering our garden, several aspects of how to water, when to water, how much to water. Try to touch on a few aspects of checking our soil and our plants so we can tell during the growing season if we've got too much water, we're giving too much water or perhaps not enough water. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Kathy Hicken. She normally teaches this class, but wasn't able to do so today. So she graciously provided her notes and some of her materials to me. So much of what I am presenting in these slides comes from her. So if we can go ahead to the first slide. At the surface, you know, it would seem that watering is a pretty simple thing to do. You go out there and you give your plants some water and just watch them grow. But actually there's a little bit of science to it. There's some technique involved, and there's also an important water conservation aspect to what we do in the garden. Many of you probably know that we use huge amounts of water each year in the garden. And our water bill is by far and away the largest aspect of our yearly budget. Let's see, might have gone a little bit too far. There we go. So one of the things we have to think about is, as we go through the year, are we giving our gardens too much and our plants too much water or not enough water? Either one can actually damage or kill our plants. Also, it's important to think about, are we watering at the right time of day? And how much are we giving the plants at different times during the year? On top of that, each type of or variety of plant might have its own water needs. Some plants love a lot of water. So other plants don't like so much water. And all plants have differing water needs depending on what time of year it is. Next. So if we look at the different stages of maturity of our plants, we start about this time of year, we put our seeds in the ground, or we have little seedlings that are coming up out of the soil. And their water needs are that they need a moist soil from about an inch or two underneath the soil pretty much constantly. So that requires that we give them water just about every day or every other day, and certainly check the moisture level consistently. That needs to be done in order for the seeds to germinate properly. Transplants, on the other hand, we try to take a different approach. We water those every few days instead of every day. And we start to water a little bit deeper so that the root system can start to penetrate down into the soil. Established plants, as we get further into the year, our goal there is to try to get moisture down to at least 6 inches below the surface and to water even less frequently. Next one. So one of the things that's important for us to do is to kind of watch the soil, check the soil, and check the plants. Those can be important signals as to whether we're giving too much water, not enough water. You can stick your finger down into the soil. That's a simple test, but a very reliable one. Just stick your finger down into the soil 3 to 4 inches early on. If it's moist, you're probably giving your plants enough water. If it's dry, it might be time to give them a drink. Looking at the plants can also be an important thing. Look at the leaves. The leaves can get wilted for a number of different reasons, but giving them too much water or not enough water can cause leaves to wilt. certain types of plants like tomatoes or peppers, in the heat of the summer, their leaves will naturally wilt during the middle of the day. But if you wait till the end of the day in the evening, you'll notice that they'll recover and you wouldn't need to give them any more water. Next one. So then we have plants, a lot of our vegetables in the garden require differing amounts of water at certain times. I've got a few examples here. For example, our beans and our corn, our cucumbers, peas, and squash, when they start to flower or fruit comes on them, that means it's time to give them more water. Likewise, carrots and radishes and turnips, our root vegetables, when they're starting to form their roots, they want to drink. Our cauliflower and our broccoli and our onions and potatoes, when they're forming their heads and their bulbs and tubers, they're thirsty. And our pumpkins and our melons, we get toward the end of the season, they're starting to get big. That's when it's time to give them more water. Our plants can fail during the course of the season for a number of different reasons. Certainly overwatering is one of those reasons. You might not think that, but overwatering can sometimes be worse than not giving them enough water. And we'll talk about that directly. Bugs during the middle of the season become kind of a problem for us in the summer. Squash bugs, potato bugs, aphids, tomato worms, those can be problems for us. When it gets humid during the middle of the summer, we get wilt and mildew on some of our plants too. So just keep an eye on all those things. It's not always a matter of too much or not enough water. What happens when we give our plants too much water? What's the result? Well, the root, as it goes down into the soil, actually requires oxygen. The top of the plant, it wants carbon dioxide, but the root requires oxygen. And if the root becomes saturated in water, it becomes deprived of oxygen, and that can damage or kill the plant. A waterlogged root can get fungus on it, and that causes root rot. We've got these little root hairs just below the surface of the soil, and if those get waterlogged, they can kill the root hairs and damage the plant. We like to add fertilizers to our soil, either early or during the year. You know, we add nitrogen or phosphorus, potassium. Well, those fertilizers can be washed away by large high streams of water before they get to the root and into the plant. Also, we're wanting our root to go deep into the soil in search of moisture and in search of nutrition. If we give a large stream of water, a flood the plants, it encourages the root to stay shallow instead of going deep. We have natural and also additive organic material we put into our gardens, such as compost. And that compost can assist in giving nutrients into the soil, into the plant. But if we wash the nutrients away from that compost, we've defeated our purpose. And then last but not least, lots and lots of water can encourage pests and diseases. Okay, next one. There are certain things we can do to amend the soil that can help us get a nice, healthy soil that percolates water properly. A loamy soil is considered an ideal soil. It's a kind of a mixture of clay and sand and silt. And what that does is it allows for nice percolation of water slowly down through the soil and into the root system. When we add compost to the soil, like the manure piles and such that we have at the back of the garden, we add that into the soil, and that can create a very healthy percolating type of soil. But keep in mind, of course, that you can't just put the compost on top. It has to be worked into the soil either by tilling or by manually turning it. That way you create a nice percolating soil that allows the roots to absorb nutrients and water gradually. Mulch is one more thing that can help retain moisture in the soil. We have gardeners who put straw or hay over the top of their soil. during the winter. That helps retain moisture and warmth during the winter. And likewise, mulch in the summer can do the same thing. It helps to retain moisture. Next one. So the big question is, how much water should we give? You know, when have we given enough? When have we not given enough? Well, there's some tests that we can do during the year that help us to determine that. What you want with our transplanted plants and our established plants is to get a nice amount of moisture, at least 6 inches down into the soil. There is a water meter that is available at the shack for testing the soil moisture. Also, there's a coring trowel that's up there that can be used, or if you choose, you can purchase those at the store. But regular monitoring of the soil deep down at that level is important to make a true determination of whether you're giving enough water or not. Also, keep an eye, again, on your foliage. A good example is if you find yellowing leaves that are falling off too soon, often that's a good sign that you're giving your plant too much water. Or a dry brown leaf that's falling off might be an indication that the plant is too dry. What are the things we should try to avoid when we water our garden? So these are the don'ts. Don't, especially during the middle of the summer when it's hot, don't water your plant manually in the heat of the day. That tends to scald the leaves and it tends to cause evaporation, and it's not a conservative way to water our garden. It's important not to water the foliage directly. That causes water loss. It fosters weed growth, primarily because you end up watering outside the foliage zone of the plant. If you water too often and you water lightly, what ends up happening is the root system stays shallow and you don't encourage that taproot to drive deep into the ground. We discourage the use of sprinklers that spray large amounts of water over the foliage and get outside of the foliage for the same reasons. Watering outside the foliage zone is just a waste of water and it encourages weed growth. What are the proper ways to water? Well, our mantra kind of is, when we're watering manually, water slow and low. And that means if you're attaching a wand to your hose, put the wand with a very gentle stream down close to the ground and let it water very slowly, percolate deep into the ground. You can use a watering can or a pail to achieve the same thing. When Glenn talks after me, he's going to talk about the use of our automated watering systems, how to set those up, the various kinds, and how those work. But the basic concept is that we try to use a dripper or emitter type system that directs a small amount of water to the base of the plant that will go exactly to the point where the plant root needs the water. Or you can use a soaker hose that could accomplish the same thing. Another thing to keep in mind is when we plant our seeds or our seedlings, it's a good thing to create a shallow basin or a shallow furrow if you have a row of a certain type of plants. And what that does is helps retain water where the water is needed down into the root system, and it discourages runoff. As we get closer to harvesting time, our plants right at the end are going to want less water as they try to concentrate sugars in the produce and the fruit. That's going to make for a healthier product and for a better tasting product. As I said, Glenn will be talking to you about the drip systems. There are several advantages to using an automated drip system over manually watering, especially as it gets hot. We know from science that we get increased water efficiency by using a drip system, less loss. We know that plants do better, they're healthier and produce a better product using a drip system. We know that we can avoid moisture-related diseases, pests, and mildew by using a drip system. A flush of large amount high pressure water into the soil causes compaction, and it breaks up the soil and the nutrients in the soil. So using a very slow percolating drip system helps reduce that. And naturally, a drip system helps promote a slow, deep watering system. Okay, final notes. When you're thinking about what you're planting and when you're planting early on, it's a good idea to try to keep water-loving plants together, and plants that don't like so much water together. I think you'll have a more successful garden if you try to organize it that way. As we go starting now on through the season, we have 3 different types of water pipes that we use to water. Right now we're using the so-called ranch spigots, which are the tall maroon colored pipes. They're located in the central pathway, or the road that goes north and south down through the garden. There's 2 of those. And in this case, you use your pail or your bucket and you fill up your bucket there at those ranch spigots, and then you take those back and water your new seeds or your seedlings. When we get close to the point, which should be in the not too distant future, when we're not going to have any more hard freezes, that's when we'll convert over to the purple lines. The purple lines are interspersed amongst the rows of the gardens, and you'll be sharing those purple gardens with those purple spigots with your neighbors. You can attach your hose up to that purple line, and then attach your hose and your wand to your wand, and then be able to manually water your garden that way. Eventually, when we get toward the heat of the summer, that's when we'll convert over to an automated watering system. And the lines we use for that are the yellow spigots that are located at one of the ends at each garden. Glenn will be talking to you about how to set up your system and the different types of manifolds that allow you to set up several types of several soaker hoses to a single manifold. But when we get those set up, there'll be a date where we on the water team begin turning on the system for you. Usually when we turn that water system on, we water approximately 3 times a week. We do it for about 15 minutes per watering. That ends up being altered a little bit depending on how much rain we get or how hot and dry it is. Okay, next slide. Just to recap kind of what we've covered, spend time learning how to monitor your soil and your plants to find out whether you're giving them too much water or not enough water, or just the right amount, just like Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Remember that plants need differing individual amounts of water as you go through the season. At certain critical times, they require more water than others, and not all plants like the same amount of water. Our mantra in the garden is to water slow and low and deeply for good percolation. Always try to check your soil and your plant leaves and your foliage before you water to make sure that they really do need more water. And mulching is a very good thing to do to help retain moisture in the water, in the soil. I think that's it.
Perfect. I'm actually going to unmute Glenn too at this time. And Dan, I'm leaving you unmuted too. And there were a couple of great questions, and I'll let each of you who feels is the best person to answer. The first question, which I'll actually answer, is this going to be available later? Yes, you'll be able to replay this entire presentation via our Facebook, and it's Payson Community Garden. We have a Facebook page there, and we're posting the replays of the classes on that. As far as, are you able to get the slides? I'm going to have to talk to Nita about that and see if we can get an answer on that. The next question from Sharon, great question. How do we know which plants are water loving?
Well, maybe Glenn's a better person to answer that, because I think there might be some information in some of the classes about that. Glenn, what do you say?
Well, uh, well, really, the only way to know which ones are more water loving than others is I go by size a lot of the times, but you can pretty much figure that anything that's going to grow during the summer is going to take more water, and anything that's going to be cold hardy, like the cold crops, like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, that sort of thing, probably will take less water just because of the time of the year that you're putting them in. Experimenting, of course, is the very best way. Part of what I'll be talking about is what you also said. When you're doing your garden, you need to have like plants in like areas, because that will allow you to put your irrigation system to those areas. So something that may take more water may take more of a drip system or soaker hose around each plant, so that it can go ahead and give you enough water, especially deep-rooted plants. For instance, tomatoes like to be deep-rooted, and even though they're food lovers, it also, in order to get that root down, it takes water going down. So in terms of that, it would be, you have to kind of watch size and when they're developing.
Thank you, Glenn. The next question from Jen is it better to go with a buried soaker hose or a 1/4 inch drip line?
Wow, that's a,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Glenn.
I would say that actually you could use either one of them. I don't like to bury the soaker hose, because I personally want to make sure that it's still dripping or soaking, all during the year. So, but if you bury it, that's also less water evaporates and goes away. So, I think that's personal preference.
Sometimes it depends, I think, also on how you have your plants distributed through the garden. If you have a relatively small number of plants, sometimes you get a little bit less wastage by having an emitter that goes directly underneath the plant. Whereas if you have a row of plants that are fairly close together, a soaker hose, works great.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next, actually, there's a question about, is the garden open today and what are the hours? So the garden is open on Saturdays right now through the rest of this month between 8 and 5. So 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. And then for this month, Mondays and Thursdays, we're open from 3 until 6 p.m. And then in line with that, Dan, somebody asked about, you mentioned that you should water seedlings every day. So with the limited hours, do you have any ideas for how to keep those little seedlings wet if you can't get out and water them daily?
That's a challenge. I have seeds in the ground. I've had them in the ground for a couple of weeks. We've been fortunate that for whatever reason, either because we had so much rain early this year and the ground is already moist, or because it's still relatively cool. But I've been successful in keeping my soil at least down to an inch or 2 or 3, pretty wet, and my seeds have been germinating nicely by watering them, every 2 or 3 days. So I've been fortunate so far.
And then there was another question from April. Did I misunderstand that to encourage deep watering, we don't want to water deeply?
No, if I misspoke, basically what you're trying to achieve by watering less frequently, let's say 3 times a week, and watering slower, is that it encourages that taproot or the main root system to go further into the ground, deeper, in search of nutrients and water. If you water too much, too frequently, and not deeply enough, then it encourages the root system to stay shallow. and that encourages an unhealthy plant.
Perfect. Those are all of our questions. Dan, I'm going to go ahead and mute you at this time, and I'm going to stop this share, and let's go ahead and switch over to Glenn.
Okay. Are we ready to go?
We are ready to go, Glenn.
All right. Okay, so welcome. Can everybody see me all right? In tune there? Okay, so I have lots of samples to show this time. We figure out a way to get to them. This is going to be all about hooking up to the yellow lines. Well, let's first of all, we talked about seedlings. So the very best thing to work on for seedlings then is going to be the water wand. And of course, everybody has their own versions of water wands, from just the shower head connected to a hose to a complete water wand. And when you're doing seedlings then, and there's no automatic water, then we're going to have to resort to this type of a hose, so or a fixture. So watering every day. I'm just like Dan. I've been lucky to be able to go 2 or 3 days without any water. I went scooting over by the garden this morning, and they were a whole week without water, and they're still just fine, and they're only just little bitty radish seedlings are coming up. So I think we're fortunate with the weather. However, it's not always that case. So every 2 to 3 days is probably adequate, even during the summer. The key is you want to get your seedlings in before it gets too warm, and it has to be watered once or maybe even twice a day. So it's when you're first starting seedlings, it's going to take go into the garden as often as you can. So anyway, this would be the feature. I'm trying to just stay with the fixtures. I think Dan did a great job of talking about water frequency and all that sort of thing. I'll just kind of hopefully give you a clue on what type of things are available. So anyway, this would be for seedlings or even plants that are in the ground before the automatics are turned on. Then we'll talk about the yellow lines. So we have to connect to the yellow lines, and I like to use one of these short hoses, and this part right here will go into the yellow line itself, and then I'm able then to coil this part of it around so that it will fit right toward the end of the box itself, and then all of our soaker hose or drip lines will then all fit into here, so it doesn't waste a lot of space. And then this can also be moved around rather than to have this fixed right to the yellow line itself. So you have some mobility on this line. So this is probably the very first thing you need to do, is figure out how you're going to set this up to the yellow lines. And then on this one, you can either put a drip system, which would be using this type of a line like this, or you're going to be using soaker hose, which is this type of soaker hose. Now, there are many, many different kinds of soaker hoses. We recommend this flat soaker hose because it's given us, this one I think you can tell by the color. This is what the color is supposed to be like, brand new. And if you can look at the color of this one's about 3 or 4 years old. So we've been using this in the garden every year, right on top of the ground, and it still is functioning just fine. The key is to blow them out and kind of clean them up at the end of the year so the calcium doesn't encrust in them, and that makes them usable year after year. But anyway, so we'll start off with the drip system. There are several different ways that you can go into this. One of them is you can hook. This is a hose thread, and it goes right onto the faucet like this, and then you can hook this type of hose onto it. So this type of a hose just plugs right into this. We just shove this right onto that, and then this can be coiled or made straight in your garden or wrapped around plants. And these are where you see, we call them a worm, where there's little worms here. They're every 6 inches, and they drip about 1.5 gallons of water. So that will water the plant. So you look at your plants. If you want to run this in a straight line with this only being 6 inches apart, it will have to bleed between this one and this one out so that each plant that's in between can get water. What most people use this for is just simply to plant your plants about 6 inches apart, and then this goes right beside the plant because that's where the plant needs it. And so it will drip down, gives you about a 6-inch puddle, and that goes down deep. And that's probably the best use of this is individual plants. If you're going to use like full like a seed tape, or you're going to run like lettuce or radishes in a line, we do recommend this is what's called a leaker or a soaker hose. We've had a lot of bad luck with this. I've had real good luck with it, but it's a matter of cleaning it real good when you're done with the season, and only using this particular one in about 4 to 5 foot sections. So this would be one that would go from wall to wall. From your garden is 6 foot by 25 foot, so I could go between 6 foot on the 6 foot size from side to side. And then you just simply plant your seeds right alongside of it, and that will soak the seedlings themselves. And also, as the plants get bigger, then it will also get the moisture down into the ground where it belongs. So those are the 2 types of smaller ones. Then from there, it goes to the flat hose. For sure, I think that this one is by far the most used, because it's fairly inexpensive. These come in 25-foot sections. They hook right onto this, and then this being at the end, you can stretch it right out 25 feet. And with using this apparatus, you can go a full 25 feet and do 4 rows within your garden. Also, in the past, had begun to make these here. This is the kind of a complicated apparatus, but anyway, it's all made by PVC, and it gives you the same thing. These happen to be a little bit further apart, but you still screw the soaker hoses onto this one and let it run all the way out. That's the easiest way, is either use this or the 4-way. They give you both the same thing. This one separates it a little bit better, makes more use of space, but this right here is also inexpensive and readily available at almost any store. So without going too far with that, this is going to be the drip system. So this particular one, you can get this on here. This plugs right into, this is a hose thread. Hose thread goes right into here. And then from this point, you can go right along either the side of your garden or down the center of your garden. And then, if you can see these or not, these are things that go inside, and your smaller pipe, smaller caliper plug into this. So this can go down the side of your garden, and then this can go plug in and then go to 6 foot. Or you can use these. This is a 1 gallon per hour dripper. So you would put one of these at each one of your plants. And then at the end of this, you would use an end cap, and the end cap comes off so that you can blow it out and get rid of the calcium. So that would give us the different types of drip systems. So part of the reason why you would use these specific different ones is Dan had talked about how in your garden you may want to separate and keep water use plants the same in the same area. So by using one of these, you can run a line which would go straight out to your garden, putting maybe lettuce in one, radishes in another, and then down at the other end you may want to use tomatoes. Well, how do you get just a little bit of water for shallow, and then get to the other end, you're using you need, like for tomatoes, where it's going to be real deep. And what you do is you manage to take one of these right here, plug it in, and maybe encircle the tomato, and then with that, these then will drip all the way around it, which will give you more volume for larger plants. And then for shallow plants, then you would use the dripper like this, and that'll give you more shallower, so that the root crops then can grow, but you still have to have it on long enough for it to go penetrate a good 3 to 4 inches deep. When we're doing this drip system, it comes in a hose like this. This is what it looks like when it comes packaged, and it does have several parts. So this one is a little more complicated. I think almost everybody uses the drip hose, but this one is actually the most efficient. So this hooks onto the 4-way. This plugs into here, and then you can run this all the way around your entire system. Parts that come with that are like this is an elbow, so that you can go, like if you have wood around your garden, you go one side and then go right on up the other side. There's couplers. If you make a mistake, you can cut it and put this coupler in to get it all back together again. And then there's T's, so that you can run different parts into different areas. So there's lots of different parts that go with that. And it is just a little bit more complicated to operate that. And I think that's one reason why most people do use this one as their best water device. So you can use this to go up and down. This comes not only in 25 footers, but it comes in 25s, 50s, and 75 footers. So you can just plug it in and then weave it all in through the garden. And again, being careful that maybe if you have 25 footers, so this 25 footer would go down one area where you're using higher water use plants, and then you can regulate then how much of this goes around each plant. And then in another area where you're where they're lower water use plants, then maybe you just want to stretch it out further away from the plant, or not quite as close, or space them out just a little bit more. So I think this is probably going to be the very best. I think most people do use this one, and this is what we recommend. So I think that's just about all I've got in equipment. So if there's any.
Perfect. We have lots of questions for you, Glenn. The
Okay.
first one, you can grab that older one that you just were holding up. And one of the questions is, how do I blow this out and clean it at the end of the year?
Okay, well, what I recommend is you just put it in a bucket and just put some vinegar in a bucket, and then put the whole thing down in the bucket, and that vinegar will help loosen the calcium. And then, of course, the very best thing to do is unplug the end. There is a plug at the end. Just take this off, hook this onto the hose, and just turn it on full blast. Probably when you take it home to your house, that's the very best way to do it at the end of the season, and just blow it out. And then leave it right out to dry. I just hang mine up in a shed that I have, and that way it completely drains and then dries, and then I fold it all up like this.
Thank you, Glenn. And about how long should they soak it in the vinegar?
A couple hours.
A couple hours? Okay, perfect. And then the next question from Jen is, with the 1/4-inch emitter line going directly into the tap, is it better to have several lines coming off 2 or 4-way, or just run a single loop around the garden?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think that goes to water use. So If you're going to use these little 1/4-inch lines, which was this coming into the tap like this, I can get it out of here. If you're coming into this one, you have 4 different ones that you can use, and each one of these has a valve on it that you can either lower or make it bigger. So what you can do is if you have higher, bigger plants and it's more into the summer, then you're going to want to use more of this around each plant. So, but at the same time, you may have just smaller seedlings, so you would put less in and around coming off of one of these. So to me, it's better to have each zone figured out by water use of each plant. And then that way you can regulate how much is coming into each one.
Perfect. And then the
That
next
makes you
question, yeah, that sounded great. And the next question is, for a drip system, do we need to use a pressure regulator at the garden?
You know, at the garden, there was a lot of talk about that. As a matter of fact, I donated a whole bunch of pressure regulators, which really didn't work. I think there's so many people on it at the same time that it actually doesn't need a regulator.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dan, I'm going to unmute you. So you're unmuted now, because there's a couple questions about specific watering. And the first one is, when do the purple spigots go on?
We don't know about that for sure. The danger we have is that if we should get a hard freeze because of the depth of those purple lines, we could possibly freeze those lines and crack them. So it's a delicate balance of trying to get those purple lines going so that it's not such a chore of hauling buckets back and forth, and waiting long enough to make sure that we're not going to have a freeze. I know there's been a lot of discussion amongst the staff about when that could happen, and I don't have an answer for you. I think that answer will probably come from our staff. I'm guessing that, you know, after the next week or so, if I just had to guess personally, that's around when we would convert over.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then Dan, I don't know the answer to this one, but I thought you might. Are there any of those wands available to borrow at the garden as part of the equipment that we have to borrow?
I think I saw one out there, but you know, I guess it might be available. I don't know. Again, the staff would know the answer to that, but I think it's a good policy because we do water manually for a pretty long period of time before the auto system comes on. It's a good idea to have your own wand, and I don't want to, you know, I'm not a salesman for Glenn. He hasn't asked me to be, but he's got some really good wands out there that produce a nice gentle stream. You can get them anywhere, but they're relatively inexpensive.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And that's all our questions. And I just wanted to make an announcement. And next week on Saturday, we're going to have Chris Jones from the University of Arizona Gila County Cooperative Extension, and he's going to be talking about intensive succession and interplanting, great techniques for successful gardens. So we'll be having that class next Saturday. And then if you have any questions about your hooking up your watering system as you're out at the garden, you can always ask staff members, and they can connect you with somebody from the water team, or they may be able to answer your questions. Also, I want to do a big thank you to Glenn and just say that his staff is wonderful about asking questions, and he has all the materials that you need. You don't have to buy them from Glenn, but we love to support him because he's so nice to take time and do these classes. And his staff is so helpful on answering questions too when you're at the store. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And this will be up on the Payson Community Facebook page by tomorrow morning if you want to see the replay. And everybody have just a wonderful rest of your weekend, and stay safe with your social distancing. And when you go to the garden, please just be aware of the policies in place and try to keep your distance from people. And there's also a system now where as you use a tool, you place it in a different place so that tool can be cleaned before somebody else uses it. And we also ask you to wear gloves. So everybody have a great day, and thank you very much to Glenn and Dan, and also to Kathy Hicken. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.